Happy New Year's. Glad you guys are here. How many of you guys, well, by the way, let me start out differently. I realize I'm getting old when my wife asked me what we wanted to do for New Year's Eve, and I didn't want to tell her that I didn't want to go anywhere because I know that sounds old. I just wanted to watch movies and stay home. Didn't want to get all dressed up and go out. So I was like, I don't know, what do you want to do? She's like, I don't know, well, what do you want to do? Because in her head, she was like, I don't want to go out anywhere. I just want to watch movies, but I want Sean to think I'm old. And so I realized I married the right girl for me. And we are both now getting old because neither one of us wanted to go anywhere. So I spent New Year's in my jammies watching, I still say jammies, so I'm not that old, all right? With the kids watching TV and had a good time. How many guys stayed home for New Year's? Raise your hand. How many guys went out for New Year's? Who doesn't remember what you did for New Year's? Because you had the best New Year's? You know you woke up somewhere. Anyway, glad that you guys are here. Every year at New Year's, we do what's called resolutions. And the overwhelming majority of everybody in this room knows what that is. But if you're like a middle schooler maybe or new into high school, you may not know what that's all about. And since it's a new year, right, it's like 2015 is gone, now it's 2016. The idea is that since we're starting a brand new year from scratch, it's kind of like when you were like in elementary school and when you stopped being a fifth grader and then you became a sixth grader, you stopped being a third grader and you became a fourth grader. When you started the new year, you could make new friends, you could be a different person, it was like a new start. I moved around a lot as a kid. So every time I switched schools, I realized nobody at the new school knows me at all. I could be anybody I want. Like I could tell them my dad's in the CIA. They wouldn't even, okay, that'd be stupid. I'm just saying, I could say anything I want and they don't know that I'm not telling the truth. So switching schools was a new opportunity to reinvent myself. And for adults now who don't move to new schools, whenever it goes from 2015 to 2016, we resolve to do things differently. That's where we get the word resolution. So a New Year's resolution is a choice that we make, something that we pick that we're going to do differently. Sometimes we will start a new good habit. Other times we will choose to get rid of a bad habit. Maybe if you're a student, your New Year's resolution is to, I remember the first resolution I can remember making was in middle school, and I've talked about this before, but my middle school years were rough, and I remember making a New Year's resolution, this year I'm going to find a friend. That's where you guys are supposed to go, oh, it wasn't that bad, but I'm just saying, I remember I want to be more friendly, I want to, that kind of stuff. So we make New Year's resolutions. Here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you an opportunity to share what your New Year's resolution was with somebody that you're sitting near. All right? If you do that, I give you 30 seconds to share a New Year's resolution with somebody right now. Go. And if you say nothing, we know it's to lose weight. You just don't want to tell everybody. So you best think of something. All right. The idea behind resolutions is improvement. And I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to improve. I think that that's a good thing. I think if you stop growing, you start dying. Right? And I'm not the one who came up with that phrase. I've read it somewhere, heard it somewhere. If you stop growing, you start dying. One of the guys, professors I had in college references a lady in her 80s that was a mentor of his, of sorts. And that in her 80s, he asked her what her New Year's resolution was. And hers was to read 14 new books that year. An 84-year-old lady, right, still going to the library. By the way, only an 84-year-old lady would go to a library now and check out a book. But who was still going to the library and checking out books, who's wanting to stimulate her mind at 80. And that's the kind of person I want to be. You know what I mean? I want to be that old dude who's just sitting in front of a television. I don't want to be, I'm not going to give any more descriptions of that. But I'm just saying, okay, I'm just going to keep moving if I can. But we want to improve, and I think that's a good thing. I don't want to end 2016 in the same place I've started, because then I'll feel like I've wasted the entire year. And I'm not the only one who feels that way. That's why resolutions are so popular. But we tend to make some of the same resolutions. So in January every year, the health clubs are jam-packed full of people, right? I don't know if it's so much that on January 1st they get all these new memberships. It's just those of us who've been paying for the memberships the last 6 years and haven't been using them, we're going to use them this week. Right? So we're going to get our $800 worth of value over the next 10 days. But then there's some of us, like me, who's like, I'm not going to go right now because it's probably crazy busy, and then I'll probably end up not going ever this year either. But for some reason, I keep that membership going. How many of you guys have already been to the gym since 2016 started? Raise your hand. And it was crazy. Was it crazy or not? Was it? It's nuts. So that's why I'm waiting until February. That's my excuse for not going in. So we want to get healthy. Some other common resolutions are, I want to stop smoking. That's a good thing. I don't want to be drunk every day. That's another good resolution to make. Some of us, it's to get out of debt. That's a good one. Some of us, it's to spend more time with family. Some of it's to... we make all kinds of different churches, by the way, honestly. A lot of people, it's very common. People want to get their families back into church. What we know from our last 8 years of history, that's how long we've been tracking this stuff, is that every week from now until Easter, there'll be a little bump each weekend in attendance leading up to Easter. It's true. So I need to ask all of you in this service, if you would, next weekend when you show up, I need everybody to move toward the center of the auditorium. So that means you guys on the outside, you're moving towards this section. And this section, you guys are all moving towards the middle. That way our service hosts can find the seats to put people in more easily. And let me just say about this service that it's pretty full, but if a family of 4 walked in, we'd have to walk them all the way up to the second row. And if we had to walk them all the way up to the second row and it's their first time, they'd be so embarrassed by that they'd be less likely to ever come back. Does that make sense? So I need some of you guys who are regular to sit in that second row so that we don't have to put them there. Does that make sense? So move toward the front and toward the middle. And that's just something that we know because one of the resolutions that people make is they want to become healthy, not just physically or just financially, but people do care about spiritual things and they know that they need accountability for that also. And the same reason that going to a gym provides that extra incentive for you to stick with things physically, being a part of a church family helps you stick with things spiritually. It has some of the similar benefits. So the question that we're asking every New Year's is, how do we make a better us? How do I make me better at being me? And this year, I'm hoping, and there's nothing wrong with that question. I just hope that maybe we start asking a question that's a little bit better than that one. We're going to start off today in the book of Nehemiah. Not everybody knows where that is. If you take your Bible, if you don't have one, they're in the pockets in front of you. Grab that Bible, open it up to the very middle. You'll most likely be in Psalms. It's the biggest book of the Bible, and it generally falls towards the middle somewhere. Start flipping towards the front of the Bible, and you'll probably find Nehemiah. And we're going to start in Nehemiah chapter 1. Now, I don't want to read the first chapter of Nehemiah without putting it in some historical context for you. This is during the time of Jewish history that's referred to as the second exile. And if you're not familiar with Jewish history, you've heard of the first exile, no doubt, and that's when the Jews were slaves in Egypt. There's a Charlton Heston movie about that. And if you're old, you know that one. And if you're young, you remember Prince of Egypt. You might have watched that cartoon movie as a kid by DreamWorks. It's about that same thing. God moves them back to with Moses. That's how he becomes famous. Out of Egypt and into where modern-day Israel is now. King David becomes king eventually, and then King Solomon. Both of these guys are very famous. King Solomon's son was a little bit of a moron, and the kingdom divided under his leadership. The northern 10 tribes of Israel become the nation of Israel. The southern 2 tribes stick with descendants of David as a king, and they become the nation of Judah. So the Jews are split up into 2 nations, Israel and Judah. A few hundred years go by, and then the Assyrians start their world. That's one of the earlier world-dominating world powers, and they come across the Fertile Crescent and down through modern-day Syria and Lebanon, and then they get to that northern part of the Jews, which is Israel, and they conquer Israel. But before they can conquer Judah, they've got problems at home because now Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians are rising up. So they pull their troops back. They've got to go back and fight Nebuchadnezzar. They lose to Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. And if you've ever played Risk, you know what happens when you take over one of the other players. You get all their countries and armies, right? So when Nebuchadnezzar takes over, he now inherits all of the Assyrian countries, one of those being Israel, and he finishes the job on his way down into the Arabian Peninsula, and he takes over Judah. when he takes over Judah, he's got a different philosophy of world conquest. Actually, it's more similar to the Assyrians than it is to the people that kick his butt later on, about 70 years later. And that is to kill everybody of fighting age, every man that's, young and healthy, they kill. And every woman that's young and healthy, they take as wives or sell into slavery. All the old people, they leave there just to kind of keep the grass watered, kind of a deal. And then all the children, they take back into their home country of Babylon and raise them to think that they're Babylon, so they forget their heritage. And so they're going to take over the world by making people forget who they used to be. That lasts about 70 years. And then the Persians come up. And then the Persians take over the Babylonians. And they've got a different philosophy of world conquest. Theirs is, we don't want to pay to feed the children of all the world, whether they think they're Persians or not. I'd rather them go back to their home country, start businesses. They wanted to build their economic engine and just pay more taxes. So when the Syrians take over, they tell the Jews, anybody that wants to leave Persia and go back to Israel, you can go back. Now, the northern 10 tribes of Israel didn't want to follow any of the descendants of David, so the nation of Israel, but the nation of Judah did. The last king of Judah had died in captivity in Babylon. His grandson is a guy named Zerubbabel. He feels duty and honor bound to lead the charge of all the Jews who are leaving the Persian Empire by permission of the Persians to go back to Jerusalem and establish their nation again. So he leads a group of people, Jews, from Persia back to Israel. They rebuild the walls around the city and they start building the temple. But when they get back to Israel, they've been gone for over 70 years now. So neighboring groups had moved in. I mean, they had houses and shelters, and people were like, hey, there's already a house here that we don't have to build for ourselves. Let's take it over. So other people had kind of been moving in on their territory. So when Zerubbabel leads the Jews back to Israel to build their homeland, there's people there. So there's a little bit of fighting, and then they kick them out. They start rebuilding the walls, like I said. But those people start banding together with all the other people they kicked out, and they start fighting them again. 56 years go by, and there's a second group, a second migration of Jews who leave Persia to go back to Israel, and that's led by a guy named Ezra, who wrote the book of the Bible that's right in front of this one. So he goes back and he finishes building the temple. Now, by the way, Zerubbabel was able to lay the foundation for the temple, and that's the part of the Wailing Wall that's there now that the Jews go and pray to, and you've seen pictures of them taking little pieces of paper and sticking them in the rocks. That's from this time period where they laid that foundation. Ezra rebuilds the temple, but the neighboring tribes have organized over the last 56 years, and they pretty much kick their butts. The Jews get discouraged. I mean, every time they make $1, they got to give 90 cents of it back to Persia. You know what I'm saying? They just can't get ahead, and they get discouraged, and they quit. So the Jews have given up on restoring Israel at this time in history, where we start reading in Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 1, and here's what it says. These are the memoirs of Nehemiah, son of Hekeliah. In late autumn, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, the Persian, I was at the fortress of Susa with Artaxerxes. We're going to find out later. Hanani, one of my brothers, came to visit me with some other men who had just arrived from Judah. So Hanani, his brother, they're brothers, so they have the same parents. His brother Hanani obviously had left Persia when Ezra led the second migration of Jews back. Now I don't know why Nehemiah doesn't go with Ezra. Zerubbabel led the first group of the first migration, and then Ezra, 56 years later, leads the second group. And when every Jew had an opportunity to go back to their homeland and rebuild their nation, the families split up. Hanani, his brother, says, well, I'm going to go. Nehemiah, are you? And Nehemiah chose not to go back. I don't know why he didn't go back. I have an opinion. I think it was because he had a really good job. Hanani obviously didn't have the same kind of job that Nehemiah did, so he wasn't as connected to Persia, we're going to find out in just a minute, as Nehemiah was. So Nehemiah had an economic, a personally beneficial reason to stay in Nehemiah that Hanani didn't have. Hanani goes with Ezra for the second migration back. But the rest of his family, Hanani himself wasn't born in Israel. He was born as a Persian slave. So he's from Persia, so that's where his family is. So there's obviously a period of time where he gets to go back and visit everybody. It's one of those times where his vacation, his summer break, spring break, Christmas break. Okay, it wasn't Christmas. It was way before Christmas. But he goes back to Persia, and he talks to his brother Nehemiah, who asks, How's everything going? That's a normal question brothers ask each other when they haven't seen each other in a while. Over Christmas, you might have gotten together with family. If you haven't seen somebody in a while, that's the first thing you talk about. So how's it going? How you like your new job? You got married. How's married life going? Oh, you started college. Where do you go? What are you studying? How do you like it? That kind of stuff. Just normal questions. So Han and I, one of my brothers, came to visit me with some other men who had just arrived from Judah, and I asked them about the Jews who had returned from there from captivity and about how things were going. So he says, how's everybody doing from Ezra's migration 14 years ago? They said to me, things are not going well for those who return to the province of Judah. They're in great trouble, and our nation, our people are disgraced. The wall of Jerusalem has been torn down, and the neighboring groups, the gates, have been destroyed by fire. They tore down our walls and burned the gates. So they're still obviously left burnt, which means that the people stopped rebuilding the walls and stopped rebuilding the gates. They'd given up. That's what had happened. We're in disgrace. Okay, the walls burned down. Did you rebuild them? No, they're still torn down. They set the gates on fire. You didn't replace the gates of the city? No, they're torn down. It's just like a mess. Like anybody comes through can rob us anytime we want. We've all just kind of given up. That's kind of where they're at. When I heard this, verse 4, I sat down and I wept. That's different from what I would have said to my brother. My brother would have said to me. Right? You got a little brother who leaves off on his own and goes to another part of the world, and he's going to set off on his own and make the world a better place, and he comes back and it doesn't work. It sucks to be you. You should have stayed here like the rest of us, you moron. Right? I mean, Nehemiah had the goods on his brother now. He could have given him a hard time, but he doesn't at all. He gets this new information, and this new information about what's happening in Israel now moves from his head to his heart, and it breaks his heart. And his thought isn't, he hears this, and he's not dispassionate about it. It's like, well, at least I'm not them, right? Looks like I made the right decision to stay here. He's not thinking any of these condescending thoughts. His heart is broken. He's moved. He sat down and he weeps. In fact, for days I mourned. I fasted and I prayed to the God of heaven. What was he praying about? What he had heard. His people. How broken things were. How this isn't the way God intended it to be. And somebody needs to do something about this. Dear God in heaven, I know that this part of life, this part of the world is broken. And I know this isn't the way you would want it to be. And somebody needs to do something. Dear God, send anybody to do it. God, please fix this. Heal this part of the world that's broken. Fix what's been done wrong. God, where's justice? Then I said, and then he writes his prayer for us. And so I'm kind of glad that he journaled his prayer so that we can hear it 3,500 years, 2,500 years later. Then I said, O Lord, God of heaven, the great and awesome God. This sounds like a kiss-up prayer to me. Anybody else? Garrett used to come in to the room if he wanted something. He's 20 now. When he was in high school, he'd walk in and he'd go, O Father of great wisdom, courage, and strength. I'd say, O Son of brown nose. But like when you lead with, oh, awesome, wise Father. He starts off, oh, God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his promises, keeps the covenant of unfailing love with those who love him and obey his commandments. Listen to my prayer. God, I know you keep your promises. I know you do what's right, and I'm asking you to hear my prayer. Look down and see me praying night and day for your people. I love this part. I confess that we have sinned against you. Who did he just say in his prayer that God was faithful to? Those who loved him and kept his commandments. So what is Nehemiah admitting? That we haven't. I admit, God, that you don't owe me anything. I admit it. You are God, I'm not. Mankind is the one that broke this world. You didn't. The way it's all screwed up now is because of the choices we've been making. The truth is, God, I know what we deserve from you, and I'm glad I'm not getting that. We've sinned as a people. Yes, even my own family have sinned, and I've sinned. See, he starts big. God, our whole nation has sinned against you. And I don't know if he felt bad, like, okay, it's not everybody else. My own family has sinned against you. You know what? It's not just my family. God, I've sinned against you. I don't deserve, you don't owe me, and I'm admitting. I think that's a great way to start off a prayer. Don't you think? Dear God in heaven, creator of the universe, the one who thunk up the idea of me. You don't owe me nothing, and I know that. To start off your prayer humbly. I just think that's wise. You know what I mean? He doesn't come all into God's face all cocky. He's not getting fresh. It's God, I know who you are, and I know who I'm not. And I know that I don't deserve it. None of us do. We, verse 7, have sinned terribly by not obeying the commands, decrees, and regulations that you gave us through your servant Moses. Please remember what you told your servant Moses. Now he's quoting God to God as if God has forgotten what God said. God, remember when you said, no, I don't, Moses. What did I say? Remember when you said that if you are unfaithful to me, I will scatter you among the nations? Did God keep his promise? Yes or no? Had they been unfaithful to God? Yes or no? And did he scatter them? Yeah. So he's just saying, I know you did what you said you were going to do. But you also said to us, you said, but if you return to me and obey my commands and live by them, that even if you are exiled to the ends of the earth, I will bring you back to the place that I have chosen for my name to be honored. Now we're getting to where he wanted to go. The people you rescued by your great power and strong hand are your servants. O Lord, please hear my prayer. Listen to the prayers of those who delight in honoring you. Those, plural. So it's like, I want you to hear my prayer. But I'm not the only one praying for this. There's a lot of us. God, other people see what's broken. Other people are asking you to hear our prayer. But then he makes it personal. He says, I'm praying for this, but I'm not the only one who sees this brokenness in the world. Others are praying for this. And then he says, please grant me success today by making the king favorable toward me. Put it into his heart to be kind to me. And I love that part of the prayer. He recognizes that anybody could do something about it. So since everybody knows that anybody could, nobody does. Right? Everybody knows that anybody could do something. So what ends up happening in real life is that nobody does anything until somebody says it looks like it's me. It's got to become personal to somebody. Are you seeing what I'm saying? And he says, nobody else is doing it. We're all praying for this. We all know this in the world is broken. Nobody's doing anything about it. All right, I'll do it. So God, let the king be favorable toward me. And then he says at the end of verse 11, in those days I was the king's cupbearer. That's why he asked God for blessing. He was the king's right-hand man. It's like he was the king's chief of staff, the president's chief of staff. He was the administrative assistant to the most powerful man alive on the earth. That's probably, in my opinion, why he didn't go with Ezra. He would have had to give up more than Hananiah had to give up. Hananiah had what kind of a job? We don't know. That's how insignificant it was. But not his older brother Nehemiah or his younger brother Nehemiah. Nehemiah is the chief of staff to the most powerful man in the world. That's what he would have had to give up. That's a big deal. But he comes from nothing, from an indentured group of people, rises up to the second most powerful, right? I mean, he's the one who controls who comes into the throne room. He's the one who teaches people how they're supposed to act in the presence of the king. He keeps the king's calendar. That's who he is. He is the assistant to the king. It's a big deal. Now, it goes on to say, the rest part of the chapter, and we're not going to read it for the sake of time, that he prays for God to bless him with the king for 4 months. Every day he prays that. Why doesn't he do anything about it for 4 months? What takes him so long? In my opinion, he doesn't know what he's going to do yet. Maybe he was afraid. Maybe he was just looking for the right opportunity. I don't know. But what I know was he spent the next 4 months praying, God, hear the prayers of your people. Hear my prayers. Answer them. Keep your promise. We will turn from our sin to begin following you. God, please fix this. Use me to do it if you want, but you got to put some kind of crazy idea in my head because I don't know what I'm supposed to do about it yet. When God finally does put it in his heart what to do, He comes in before the king. He's got a sad face, which in those days could have gotten you killed. You didn't come into the king's presence sad, with a whiny face. You came into the king. You pretended everything was going great. You wanted to kiss up to the king like everybody else was supposed to kiss up to the king. So the king says, why is your face sad? So how can I be happy when the gates of my city are torn down? And the king said, well, what do you want? This is why he was praying. He says, I need you to let me out of my contract. And I need you to send me back to Israel. By the way, I don't have any money saved up, so I need you to pay for gas and tolls. And a few stops at McDonald's, maybe. And not just that, when I get there, I need some Home Depot gift cards. I need you to pay for everything. And the king does. The king releases him. Not just releases him out of his contract, but gives him a blank check to do everything. What if he had never done that? You know what I'm saying? I think that's amazing. And it leads me to this question. The question that we're asking at this time of year is, how do I make me a better version of me? What if we started asking what needs to be done around me? Not what needs to be done in me. What needs to be done with me, but what needs to be done around me? If you want to be a better person, then make somebody's world a better place. That's what I'm saying. The people that you admire most did not dedicate their lives to becoming better versions of themselves. Right? The people you admire most are those who dedicated themselves to make the world better for others. Is that true? On the backside of your communication card, I'm going to give you a 30-second exercise. I want you to write down the name of the person that you admire most. Write it down. Some of you guys are like, dang it, I should have grabbed a communication card. That lady handed one to me and I said, no thanks. That even came with a free pen, dang it. Go ahead, write it down. Who do you admire most in the world? And you can't pick Jesus. Some of you guys are like, dang it. Arr. Who do you admire most and why do you admire them? Write it down. I'll give you 30 seconds. You're probably finding out that you don't admire them because of how much money they made for themselves. You don't admire them because they lost 30 pounds. You don't. There's nothing wrong with those resolutions. It's just that our resolutions to improve ourselves don't make a difference to anybody. Nobody cares that you make more money for you. Doesn't help anybody. Nobody cares that you look more sexy for you. Great. Now I just hate you for looking sexier than me. Right? No, improve yourself all you want. It just doesn't help anybody else. That's all. It makes no difference to anyone. The people you admire most are the people who did not get paid to stay after school for 3 hours to help you catch back up so that you could graduate on time. The coach who gave up 3 hours of every day of August, September, October, and November for a $1,500 stipend to be your football coach. You know what I'm saying? The people that made the biggest difference to you, maybe it's a civil rights leader. Maybe it's a military leader. Maybe it's a political leader. I don't know. Maybe it's a next door neighbor, a father figure. You didn't have a dad, but that person was like a father figure to you, and they treated you like a kid. They changed your world, and it had nothing to do with how they improved themselves. It had everything to do with the time they spent trying to improve who? You or others. Everyone can make the world a better place for somebody. Everybody can do this. If you don't, 2016 will come and go, and you'll still be watching TV or playing video games, wishing things were better, or blaming other people that they aren't. But what if you were to buy back half of that time and spent it on the area that broke your heart? Here's the question. Instead of, how can I make me a better version of me? Here's the question I want you to ask. What breaks my heart in the world? I'd like you to write that on your communication card. That's the last little exercise, 30 seconds. What breaks your heart? What's broken in the world? I'll give you a couple of examples. What about the, 13,000 kids in the foster system here in Massachusetts? Who's going to take those kids in? Who's going to keep them from going to another home where they might be sexually abused? Who's going to show them what it looks like to live in a healthy home? Who's going to do that? Who? Somebody. And so since somebody, everybody thinks somebody should, and anybody could, guess who does it? Nobody. Nobody. Because nobody makes it personal. Your heart broken over all these people dying of heroin overdoses? Meth over? Somebody should do something about it, right? How much time are you spending? You pray for them too, don't you? Somebody should, so guess who does? Nobody. Nobody. 253 people died of heroin overdoses. 2015, just in Eastern Mass. Who's going to help these people? I don't know, what is it? What breaks your heart? I mean, you don't have to be an adult for this. You're in 7th grade, and you know there's a kid in your school that's picked on by everybody. I remember that I was that kid. I'd have given anything. I didn't want the cool kid sitting at my table. I just wanted a normal person, when I asked if I could sit with them, to not say table saved. That's it. My hopes weren't even as high as to have somebody come sit by me. You could be that person. And you're 12 and you can change somebody's world. There's people all around us. We just don't care about anybody else as much as we care about who? That's it. And that's why we're not like Jesus. See, this is what followers of Jesus have been doing for the last 2,000 years. They recognize that everybody has value regardless of what contribution they make to society. That people have intrinsic value because they're created in the image of God. Jesus was the model for this. He didn't hang out with the political elite or the wealthy. In fact, it seems like he favored the poor, doesn't it? The beggars, the sick, the prostitutes and traders, the homeless, the leper, the abandoned, the forgotten. That's who he actually favored, but not us. Proof? There's strangers you will help and strangers you won't. Right? Yes or no? Hey, I'm in the same boat too. Aren't there strangers we'll help? And aren't there strangers we won't? Why? There is something you used to determine their value that the other person didn't measure up to. What was it? One had a job, the other one didn't. One was attractive, the other one didn't. One was thin, the other was heavy. One was your race, the other one wasn't. What was it? Not so with those who follow Jesus. In fact, it impressed the emperors of Rome that the Christians took care of the widows and orphans, not of just their own tribe, but also of the Romans who'd been making their lives miserable. It was Adoniram Judson who left Andover, Massachusetts, 20 years ago? He was a student north of the city, North Boston. And he found out that people in India worshiped nature. He recognized that if they don't get an opportunity to know and to follow Jesus, the only way they can be made right with God is through faith in his son Jesus. The death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus is the only thing that God will accept on Judgment Day as a substitute payment for our sins. Somebody needs to tell them this. So he began praying that God would send somebody to go do this. But guess who was going? Nobody. But guess what homeboy did? Somebody needs to. Anybody could, but nobody is. So I guess it's me. sells everything he has, moves, takes a boat to India, gets there. He's the first, by the way, first American missionary. The British missionaries are already there, and they're like, you're Americans, you guys kicked our butts 100 years ago, so you can't stay here. He had a great excuse to come back to Boston, but what he does instead is he keeps going east, and he goes to Burma. Wants to give them an opportunity to know and to follow Jesus, but they don't have a written language, and they don't have any medical clinics. They don't have medical supplies. He gives them a written language, and today, in that atheistic country of Burma, there are hospitals, schools, universities, and clinics all over the nation named after who? A kid from North Boston who says anybody should. Nobody is, so I will. Who's been for the last 120 years? Where's the girl from Randolph who's changing the world? Sorry, she's flipping properties. She's making her millions. She doesn't have time. What about the dude from Brockton? God broke his heart over something. But he ain't done with his education. Because he's going some places. He ain't going to be poor like his mom and dad were poor. Maybe. But he'll die and be forgotten. You're going to spend your life or you're going to invest your life. You'll only do one of those two things. You'll spend your life on you. And when you die, it will have been spent. And there will be nothing to show for it. Or you will invest your life. You can have the kind of funeral where only your closest friends and your surviving relatives attend. Or you can have a funeral where there is standing room only. And the truth is, you have the power to choose which funeral you will have. You really do get to pick. I believe that Nehemiah's heart was broken on purpose by God. I believe it was by divine interruption that his heart was broken. God broke his heart so that he would do something about it, and he does. He had no idea, though, what chain of events that would set into motion. He didn't know that when he went back and rebuilt the walls and the gates, that would be the gate through which Joseph and Mary would bring Jesus into the temple that he helped rebuild for Jesus to be dedicated as a baby 8 days after the manger. He didn't know that this was the temple that Jesus was going to get lost in when he was 12. He didn't know that this was the city where the Messiah was going to show, like his city, his building, his walls. He had no idea. And neither do you. You have no idea what chain of events is going to follow your decision to leverage your life in the area in which your heart is most broken. You have no idea. There's nothing wrong with flipping houses. There's nothing wrong with making a lot of money. But dear God in heaven, live for something more than that. Leverage your money. Do something with it besides just spending it on you. Be bigger than that. Do something with your talents. Get your education, stay in school, do whatever it is God puts in your heart to do. But know that God put it in your heart to do so that you'd be prepared to do something more than just make your life awesome. I'll leave you with one final story. When I moved here, I was a professor at a college in the city. My wife and I, we moved into Stoughton, not really thinking, oh, I want to live in Stoughton. When I moved here, as much as it was the only house under $300,000 that was near a Walmart and a Taco Bell. That really is the truth. My wife wanted to be near a Walmart and I wanted to be near a Taco Bell because Jesus loves Mexicans. That's in the Bible. He does, it's true. He loves everybody, but he especially likes tacos. Soft shell, not hard. Jesus doesn't like hard shells. Unless he's on his diet and he's got to cut carbs, so he goes with the corn tortillas instead of the flour ones. Because that's what insurance said to do to lose 22. Sorry, I'm way off track. We get into Stoughton and our neighbors ask us to start, our non-religious neighbors ask us to start a Bible study for a friend of theirs who had attempted suicide. So we're praying about whether or not we should do this. Who starts a Bible study in their house? Right? I mean, that's like if you had a neighbor ask you to do that, like, that's weird, right? What do you do with that? I didn't. Okay, like it makes sense to you that I'm a pastor because I'm a pastor now. I was assistant pastor then, but I was mainly a professor, right? So it's kind of like, who does this? So we were praying, God, give us some kind of confirmation this is what you want us to do. And that next week while we were praying, 21-year-old junior in one of my classes comes into my office. I think he wants to talk about homework, but he says, hey, listen, randomly, if you ever start a church, you want to be a part of it. That's random. Go do your homework. If you focus more on starting your paper than starting churches, then maybe your grades wouldn't be what they are. But why did he say that? There's a thought. He's from Alaska. He moved here to the lower 48. And first of all, people from Alaska are weird. We all know that. That's why there's 20 reality shows, all based in Alaska. Right? There's our wackos. So he come to the lower 48. But he recognized the spiritual disconnection that exists here in the South Metro part of the city. Didn't want to leave. The church he came from is the largest church in all of Alaska. It's the largest church in the entire state. His youth pastor is now the assistant pastor. He says, when I graduate, I'll do whatever it takes, but I don't want to go anywhere. I just want to help you start a church. I just let that sit in the back of my head. 3 months later, we start the Bible study because I was scared to do it. That's why it took so long. And he kept his word. He helped us with the church. What we needed most was somebody to take the kids out of the living room so the adults could have a conversation. So he did Sunday school classes in the attic with pretty much just my kids and their friends who were the kids of the neighbors across the street. He graduated and he had an opportunity to go back to Alaska and get a full-time job. But that would mean walking away from what he felt his heart was most broken over, the spiritual disconnection of people, awesome people who live in the South Metro area of Boston. So he doesn't put up his resume or doesn't do anything, doesn't even interview for a job. You know what he does? He gets a job at a call center because that's what every college grad wants to do. They want to do telemarketing. I did that for Discover Card. It was horrible. So he realized it didn't give him enough flexible time. So when he was in high school, during the summer, he had done a side job doing driveway resealing stuff. So he YouTubed how to do driveway repaving, resealing, and he started his own driveway business so that he could stay here in Boston and have flexible enough time to help Grace Church get going from scratch. Was getting his product at a place down in Rhode Island, and so spending all of his money on gas and products so he could get this business going and couldn't afford an apartment. And I didn't know this at the time, otherwise I would have let him live in my attic, which isn't as bad as it sounds. It's fixed up, it's got carpet. But he lived out of his pickup truck for 3 months that summer. Why? Because somebody should do something, but nobody is. So I will. Wasn't making enough money with the driveway resealing business and found out that Grace Church was going to be charged $5,000 for our website. And he said, I think I can do that. Having never done it before, he goes to Barnes & Noble and buys a book on coding, reads the book on coding, and builds our first website. One of my pastor buddies saw it and said, hey, who did your website? I said, a driveway guy. I said, do you think he'll do ours? So I said, maybe, and he did. And more people started doing it until he could quit the driveway job, started doing that, named the company, needed a partner, somebody who was a little bit more organized and administrative minded, and brought on a partner. And guess the partner that he brought on? Taylor, the guy who just prayed right before the Taylor worked for free for Grace Church for his first 6 years, running the company with Brian Buford. They sold the company to a guy who paid him a buttload of money for it, and then hired them to run the company for him for way more money than what they ever paid themselves. They used that money to start 3 other businesses. And to this day, we have a full-time pastor here at Grace Church that we've never had to pay a dime. Half of our administrative staff, we only have to pay part-time because the other half of their time they're using to run Brian's businesses. How many of you guys looked at our church online before you ever showed up on a weekend? How many of you guys ever got a mailer? How many of you guys enjoy the worship team, the lights, all the design? All because one 21-year-old kid did not take the full-time job back home, but was willing to walk away from everything to do something about what his heart was broken. And in part because of a 21-year-old kid who had the guts to do something about what God had broken his heart about. Over 1,700 people showed up on Christmas Eve and had an opportunity to know and follow Jesus. What's going to happen because you figure out a way to fix what God's broken your heart over? What if everybody in this room did something? And the truth is, I know anybody could do it. So guess who will? Nobody. Until who does something about it? Say me, please. Until who does something about it? We have the ability in this room to change the freaking world or leave it exactly as we found it. We get to choose. Let's pray. God, I'll start my prayer the way Nehemiah did. And that is that you are an awesome, holy, righteous, generous God who has blessed us with every blessing we have, who's given us more than we deserve, who's forgiven us more times than we care to count. You forgive us of sinning the same stupid things over. We've promised you 100 times we'll never do it again until we did it again, and you still forgave us again. You're good, and we are not. We've all brought our sins with us into 2016 that we had in 2015. There's not an unbroken, unflawed person in this room, God, we admit it. And we know this world is not as you would have it to be. There are parts of it that are broken. And you've broken our heart over it. There are foster families in this church that haven't become who you've called them to be. There are families in this church who need to adopt kids. You've put it in their heart and they've not acted on it. There's people, God, who should be doing other things and they're not. There's people, God, who should be leveraging their money. There's people, God, who should be leveraging their education, their talents, for more than just themselves. God, you've broken our hearts over stuff. And if he hasn't, then maybe your prayer is, God, break my heart over something. Could you make that your prayer? Break my heart over something that needs to be fixed. If you're in middle school, God, help me to find one kid in middle school that doesn't have any friends that I can be nice to. You're 11 years old and you can change somebody's world. Why in the world wouldn't you do that? God, break my heart over something that breaks your heart. And every day you pray for an idea on what you can do about it until God gives you that idea. And when he does, you lay it all on the line to do it. You have no idea the chain of events you're about to set in motion. God, you've called us not just to be better versions of ourselves, but to make the world a better place in your name. And I ask that. Break our hearts. Give us great ideas. And give us bold faith to take great risks for your glory and for the good of those that you absolutely love all around us every day. We ask this in your name, Jesus, and we pray and say,